Texas Math Mundo audience. Today we have Dr. Karl Galle, the 1987 state champion in science and calculator application, Conference 2A from Liberty Hill High School, a Panther in the house. I look forward to that. Dr. Karl Galle, 1987 state champion, science and calculator applications, right ahead. And let me take a moment to say that if you enjoy this content, please hit the subscription button and the notification bell, smash that like button, and leave a comment below. Dr. Karl Galle, state champion 1987, right ahead. My name is Saul Cantu, and this is Texas Math Mundo. Texas Math Mundo audience, we're in store for a real treat today. In the house, we have Dr. Karl Galle. He's the 1987 state champion in science and calculator applications from Liberty Hill High School, a Panther. Welcome. Thank you for being here, Dr. Karl Galle.
Thank you. Glad to be here. This is fun to talk about after all these years.
Awesome. I'm really interested in getting your perspective. There's some distance from your time as champion, so it's going to provide a very interesting perspective.
All right. Looking forward to it.
How are you doing?
Oh, doing fine. I mean, it's a kind of surreal time for everyone, with the pandemic the last year and a half, as I'm sure you know. I mean, then you think we're coming out of it, and then another variant comes along, and it's back to being careful and not seeing as much of your friends and family as you want to. But relatively speaking, we're pretty fortunate. We live in an area with that it's easy to get out and walk around. So even if you can't go to big crowded events or things, then at least you can get outside and maybe chat with some of the neighbors from a distance or something like that. So Doing all right.
And where are you currently?
Just north of Washington, D.C. So D.C. is right in between Maryland and Virginia. So we're outside the D.C. Border, a little bit to the north in Maryland.
Okay, cool. So state champion, 1987, science and calculator application. I want to get into your background a little bit. So where are you from, born and raised, and what is your cultural heritage?
Well, I was actually born in Nashville. So my family is a little bit of, one of these academic migrant families. So my dad was teaching at Vanderbilt when I was born there. And then he took a year's sabbatical at University of Wisconsin, and so I actually went to kindergarten in Madison. And then he took a job at University of Texas at Austin. So I went to first grade inside Austin, but my parents both come from sort of rural backgrounds, and so they were looking to live a little outside the city. And so there was that first year we rented a place in Austin, and then they found a place to the north. At the time, it was very rural. By now, the Austin sprawl has kind of engulfed everything. But at the time, this was a very rural area. And so then, from second grade on, I was at Liberty Hill, which was a 2A school. And in fact, for the beginning of that, it was very much on the small side. So. Oh wow! Okay. That's how I ended up there.
Oh, awesome. So when did you realize that you had a talent for academics, for mathematics?
I think for mathematics specifically, it would probably be in first grade. So the first grade teachers in my Austin elementary school They picked out a few of us and sort of bumped us right away to second grade math. So I was part of that group, and then it just sort of, I was one of those kids. It was sort of a recreational thing. I would just write out large numbers and multiply them in my extra time, kind of thing. It became a little bit of a hobby. And then when we moved to Liberty Hill the next year, they were a little bit puzzled by the fact that this new kid was showing up, and he was showing up in second grade, but he'd already taken second grade math. But they were like, okay, well, you can take third grade math, and so I did that. And then in third grade, they decided, well, probably you're ready for sixth grade math, and so I did that.
Wow.
But then there was the problem that kindergarten through sixth grade was in one building, and 7 through 12 was in a different place. And so I did sort of independent study math for fourth and fifth grade with a pre-algebra book. And that was sort of the beginning of this alternating back and forth between doing organized classes and doing sort of, find ways to keep Karl busy on math stuff or whatever.
What a path. So the path was young in many ways. And,
it was very young. It was very much from elementary school. And it was a combination of a few teachers who sort of picked me out early on and said, you can do a little bit more than what the normal sort of pace of things. And then also just sort of the things I enjoyed doing in my spare time. And of course with support from my parents as well.
Okay. Any, during these elementary years, any teacher worthy of note?
I had good teachers in elementary school, but I mean, really a lot of it came down to the principal, Louine Noble. She really set the standard for just a lot of academic support, and she was the one who really got the UIL program going. So I started, and a lot of the fact that I went into UIL competitions started really in elementary school. So I started doing, I guess storytelling was my first UIL competition, but then I think they started number sense when I was in fifth grade. And then it just sort of went on from there. And then there was a cohort of us from elementary school that sort of moved through the ranks. And so actually by the time we got to high school, I mean the high school had been doing some UIL before, but it was a very small school, and they didn't have a lot. But it was when sort of my cohort came through and we were freshmen in high school was the first time that the high school won the team competition at UIL, because there was this sort of wave of kids coming through that had been supported from the elementary school, and then it took over a little bit from there.
Oh, awesome. Isn't that, I love it when the district and the adults around find ways to give students to exert their energies in such a positive manner. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah. So you started competitive mathematics or competitive academics as early as grade school.
Yeah, as early as grade school.
Wow,
Yeah. There's the UIL, and then I remember the other thing I really got into. I don't know if they still do this. They had a young authors thing where kids would write short stories or poems or whatever, and then at the end it was fun. You learned how to make a simple binding, with like cardboard and colored paper and whatnot to bind your book. So it was a combination of mostly a writing exercise, but it was generally about creativity. It's a sort of creativity thing, which is a little bit of what the UIL process nurtures as well. I mean, certainly in math and calculator applications and science, there's specific problem solving that you're doing, but it's also learning to do different types of problems than what your standard homework assignments are and that sort of thing. So a lot of that really started in elementary school, as both as a competitive thing and also just as a general extracurricular fun things to do. I did sports. I enjoyed sports. I was never any good at them, but the academic stuff was sort of my equivalent of I was never going to play on the football team because I was a skinny little beanpole that would have been just broken in half. But what I did for recreation was these different academic competitions.
Oh, awesome. So who inspired you and who shaped your value system?
I mean, a lot of it comes to my parents in terms of, really, encouraging reading and academic exploration more generally. And also sort of, between them and the elementary school, sort of recognizing that, okay, we've got this kid that needs a little bit more stimulation, and we need to figure out what to do with that, so that he also has something to do. And then the next step, starting in junior high, I would go to these sort of summer academic camps that Duke University started in the early '80s, based on a program out of Johns Hopkins, and I think there's a bunch of them around the country now, and that was really helpful, not just sort of as a way of academic development, but also just as a way of meeting kids from other schools and other types of schools. Because particularly when you're in a small school, I mean, you sort of, whatever the environment is, it's still a very sort of local environment. Yeah, and sure. So, between the UIL and these summer programs, you get to meet kids from a lot of different places. You talk about how things are at their school, what they're doing, what their plans are, what their backgrounds are. And it exposes you to a lot. And then, when I got to high school, there was the chemistry and physics teacher was really sort of the bedrock of the science program, Lila West. And she was the one who, really provided a lot of and this was, just in classes in general, the amount of work that she put in to the science classes was really quite something. And then a couple of the math teachers as well, Ann Winters and Jean Watson, who again, they did some coaching with UIL, but a lot of the important thing for me was just, when I showed up, I showed up in Ms. Winters' class, geometry class in 8th grade, and, she was like, okay, I've got this 8th grade kid in my geometry class, we'll make this work. And with Mr. Watson, I was a freshman when I took his trig class, and it's like, okay, I've got this freshman in my trig class, we'll make it work. And then after that sort of ran out of what the math that my school offered. And so again, I would be back to doing sort of, self-study, independent study things with usually Mr. Watson as sort of a mentor on the side. Of course, he's got his full regular classes to deal with, and then, apart from this weird kid on the side, but just allowing for that kind of flexibility for someone to develop a little bit differently, that made a huge difference.
Oh, awesome. So was Miss Winters and then West and Watson?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, awesome. Great.
Okay,
so I'm kind of curious about that 1987 season and Liberty High School and UIL. What was Liberty High School like in 1987? And it sounds like the academic environment was pretty good. Can you describe the academic environment and the whole surroundings that year?
Well, it was a small school that was developing. So maybe first I'll sort of set the scene. I mean, when we moved there, when I was in 2nd grade, that was actually the first year that they had 12th grade. So for a while, they'd only had, in the years before that, they'd only had an elementary and junior high. And then they built a new school building, and then sort of gradually, one year after another, added grades. And so when I showed up in 2nd grade, that was the first year that they had 12th grade. And I don't remember how many students were in that class, but I think it was like a dozen students, maybe at most 16 students graduated that year. By the time I was a senior, my graduating class was 49, so that was the largest that there had been. So that's 10 years later. So there'd been this gradual process. But it's very funny to look. I just out of curiosity, after you contacted me, I went and looked at sort of what does the school district website look like, and they've got these pictures of these huge buildings. It's very funny. We were already growing at that time. So when I moved there, there was kindergarten through sixth grade in one building, and then right next door there was 7 through 12 in another building. And neither of these buildings were very large. And then a little bit later, they built an elementary school, sort of on a separate campus. And then my senior year was when they first built another new high school. So we just moved to another building that was only 9 through 12 rather than 7 through 12. And so, academic speaking, it was still in kind of growing pains. Like, when I was there, we didn't have any honors classes. We didn't have any AP classes. You were required to take 4 English classes, and that's how many classes they offered. English 1, English 2, English 3, English 4. You were required to take 3 history and government classes. That's how many were offered, and that sort of thing. So there were individually good teachers, in the physics and chemistry teacher and the math teachers and a few others. But it's a very different environment, particularly compared to when you're competing in some of the meets against bigger schools, where they've got multiple years of different subjects and all sorts of advanced stuff. And, you're sort of like, well, I, spend a lot of time reading math problems at home at night. So it's, but that's also part of the mix of experiences. And for me, that's also one of the things that makes the Texas UIL system great, because it really can be a mix of, these big 5A schools that have tremendously organized teams and coaches and everything else. And then small schools where, the teachers are having to do 5 different things. They're coaching sports and teaching a couple of science classes and probably, and driving kids to events on the weekend and raising their own family, which we forget about, and all of these other things. And, you as students are also just sort of, learning on the go. But there were, and one of the things before I forget, we should mention, particularly on the calculator applications, is, in '87, I was the co-state champion with actually somebody else from my high school. So Thomas Blum, who we sort of traded back and forth in calculator applications over the years with, I think I probably won more of the local meets, but then in junior year, he beat me at state. And then senior year, we actually finished in the best way possible. We tied for first at state. And there was a group of a handful of us that came through around that time.
A poetic finish, a poetic ending.
It really was. Yeah.
So was there a cohesive team working together, or were you mostly solo? Did you go to many tournaments?
It was a little bit of a mix. So, like I say, there were a group of about 4 of us.
Can you make a shout out to them?
What's that?
Can you make a shout out?
Thomas Blum, the one I mentioned, that the senior, and then the 2 the year above me, John Breen and Kent Carroll, who joined in, we were sort of the math and science group of the sort of the initial core. But then what happened after that is, like, after we had a couple of successful seasons, it also helped in the recruiting for the younger students. And so, by junior and senior year, you were seeing more people joining the teams. And that was one of the areas where it was really helpful that the TMSCA had this meet that you could bring more people to compete. Because the regular UIL meet, the problem is you can basically bring 3 people in each event. And that's how it goes. I think now they have team competitions as well, which I think probably came from TMSCA. But TMSCA, the fact that they had this spring meet where freshmen competed against freshmen, sophomores against sophomores, juniors against juniors, and so on and so forth, it meant that you could really start to develop a team. And that was so because it meant that these freshmen or sophomore or whatever, it wouldn't be that they'd work through the year and then, Carl and Thomas and John would get the 3 spots on the UIL team and they wouldn't get they could have a championship meet for themselves and then the next year work their way up. And so by junior and senior year, there was a little bit more of that. And the math and science teachers were helping to support that with some practice. So again, like they didn't have enough time to do a lot of it's not like we had team t-shirts and big events and whatnot. But they did get into it later in the year. So it was a mix of sort of some of us being kind of hardcore nerds early in school, and then some other people saying, "Oh, that looks like fun. Why don't we try that?" And then and it getting a little bit of momentum.
Awesome. I'm glad you made a mention of MSCA. That organization has been so key, and to this very day, it's key. So I'm glad you made a mention to them.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I was going to ask, what were your study habits back those days? To become a state champion, did you really exert yourself? Was it a lot of discipline?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of different things. I mean, it was sort of, there's a lot of sort of before school, after school, in the evening of doing practice tests, but it was also sort of figuring out as you went along kind of what things you needed to work on. And ironically, I think one of the best pieces of advice that came to me actually came from a piano teacher that I had, and she was a music student at UT Austin, but then went on she's now a music professor and this fantastic composer in Florida. But like one of the things that she sort of told me was, everybody knows their weak spot. You all know what your weak spot is, whether it's music and same in sports or academic competition, and you've got to focus on that. So that you don't freeze up when you get there. So if you're doing, so I did piano and tuba in high school. And so, if you're always practicing sort of at full speed, you'll come along and you're like, oh my God, this is the hard part coming up here. I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to screw it up. And of course, guess what? You screw it up. And so you have to sort of say, okay, that's my problem spot. And rather than practicing it under full speed and competition conditions, I'm just going to focus on that slow and get my brain to practice doing it right. The most important thing is get that muscle memory, that brain memory of like, this is the correct way to do it. And crossing over into, back to your original question on, practicing for the math and science competitions, that was the sort of thing of like, okay, there are certain types of problems that, you recognize you have difficulty with. And don't be scared of it. Like, recognize that. Know that this is what you have to work on. And that's, like, a lot of ways, that's what finally pushed me over the top in science. Because I've been, like, for the first 3 years of competition, biology and chemistry were always my strong suits. And so I would sort of coast through on those, and physics would be a little bit weaker. But that spring, when I was like, okay, I don't want to come up short again at state. And I sort of said, okay, I'm just going to, woodshed physics problems over and over and over in that last month before state. And that was ended up doing it. Biology, I wasn't the top scorer in biology. Chemistry, I was tied for the top score in chemistry. But physics, I was like double the second place score in physics, and that was what. And also it was because the physics section that year was just really difficult. I mean, the scores in physics that year were unusually low. So the fact that I was better prepared. So that's a long way of answering your question. But it was sort of it's a mix of you find your equivalent of weight training, the sort of like things that, okay, I need to practice, sprints or whatever. But then you also identify your problem areas, and the same for calculator applications. And I never did this as much as I should have, because there were certainly some of those geometry problems or some of those word problems where it's like, oh my God, I always screw up this one. And I really, again, at a certain point, you should have said, okay, I'm going to sit down and work 200 of these or whatever. Because it's a little bit like any competitive thing where you sort of, you focus on your weak points, so that, and focus on them slowly and carefully to get them right. So that then when you're in a competition environment and, everybody's scribbling frantically and the stopwatch is going and the adrenaline is on and the stress is on, you say, oh, you see one of these problems that you used to always screw up. You say, oh, well, I just did 200 of those last week. I can do this, and
cool. All right. So, being a calculator state champion, I'm curious, what calculator did you use in those days?
Yeah, I used the first 3 years I competed. I just used a Sharp pocket calculator. But then senior year, I broke down and went for the Hewlett-Packard 11C. Taught myself how to do everything backwards and do the memory, the extra memory of being able to not have to type in all the parentheses and whatnot. It took. It's sort of like taking something apart and putting it back together in terms of your skills. I really had to relearn everything I was doing. But yeah, that HP 11C did it for me senior year.
HP 11C. All right. So what is the most memorable moment or moments from those years?
Oh, part of it was just sort of like that whole spring of senior year. It was fun by the end, but it was also it was a slog. I mean, I remember just sort of the calendar of early to mid February was all state orchestra. Later in February was this non-UIL computer programming competition. Then there was district and regional and state. And then as soon as I finished the state UIL, the academic competition, I suddenly was like, oh my God, state solo and ensemble competition is in 3 weeks or something. And I've hardly practiced my piano piece at all. And then of course in the middle of that, I was doing college visits. So this is the time when, I was finishing college applications in January. And so it was an exhausting time. I mean, it was memorable, but it was also a time when it's sort of finally when you started, I'd had a lot of years before of coming up just a little bit short. And, when you finally started coming in on first in a few things, it's like, okay.
Wow. So you sounded very, very busy. But, you did come out first. You were a state champion. How does it feel to be a state champion? And where do you keep that medal? Okay, well, yeah. First, the question of where the medal is. That's actually right now. It's in storage with my parents because I'm just moved back to the U.S. from overseas, and so when I traveled overseas with the Foreign Service, and so when you pack out for that. First of all, there's a limited amount of stuff that you can take with you, but then also any kind of unique memorabilia, whether it's, childhood things or family things or whatever, probably you're not going to take with you because there's always you don't know what post you're going to be in overseas. I mean, this week with everything that's happening in Kabul, Afghanistan, I mean, that's the most extreme example, but you never know when suddenly you're going to have to do an evacuation or your stuff may be shipped from place to place and the ship goes down. That happened to a friend of mine. And so, I left my UIL stuff in a box in my parents' shed and have been trying to get out to visit my parents finally, with after all this time in the pandemic, now that we've moved back to the U.S. and retrieve that. So looking forward to seeing some of those. So yeah, I can't, pull them out of a drawer and hold them up for you here. So. Well, hopefully eventually they'll be prominently displayed when you feel comfortable with it. We will. I'll find them and have to figure out an appropriate place to put them. Hey, it's special. It's special. It's a nice talking piece. I think it's really special. It is, and and going back to how it feels. It's it definitely was. There's that sense of accomplishment, and and I think it also
like it ended up being a little bit of an exercise in humility, honestly, because like my freshman year, I went to state in number sense and I got third place. And first, second, and fourth places were all seniors.
Wow.
So you can imagine, freshman, third place, everybody else has graduated. I have these visions dancing in my head of like, year after year of gold medals.
Dominance.
Yeah. And then sophomore year, I just, completely cleaned up in every single competition. I won regional by 100 points. And then I got to state and had this just epic choke.
Oh.
I mean, just epic. I made more mistakes on a single exam than I did in competition in any year ever.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, pick myself up, come back again. And then junior year, I went to state in number sense calculator and science. And all three of them came up just short, fourth place. And then in calculator, there was this huge cluster of people at the top. And so literally if I it was either like a positive instead of a negative or negative instead of a positive on one of the word problems, I would have tied for first with three other people. Wow. But instead, because I put the wrong sign on it was percent change of something, I was completely out. And so, junior year, I'm like, oh my God, I still haven't done anything. And then finally senior year, it's sort of like, okay, I got a little bit cocky freshman year, got to counting my medals before they hatched kind of thing. And then finally, the persistence and all the things I did senior year of like, okay, this is my weakest point. I'm not gonna fall just short this time. I'm gonna do it. And it worked out.
Awesome. Well, I'm so happy that you won it then, so it must have felt so gratifying. To finally scale that mountaintop, be a state champion. And in two events. Two math and science events, and actually the day before in one of the journalism events as well. And that in itself was actually kind of, it sort of took the pressure off for the math and science events the next day, because the day before I won the gold medal in the journalism event, and it was like, okay, like whatever happens tomorrow, I finally got a UIL. I mean, obviously, like math and science were the ones that I've been competing in since freshman year. I mean, they were the ones that really meant something to me. But it also was like, okay, I've done this, I can do it again tomorrow. And so that was fun. That's great. So then you graduate and you go on to college. And where was college, or what degrees did you earn? What path did you take?
Yeah. So I went to Williams College, which is a liberal arts college in Massachusetts. And when I went off to college, I was sort of equally divided in my interest between like biochemistry, biomedical research, or political science and international affairs. And so I sort of pursued both of those tracks in high school. And in fact, I actually worked a summer in Houston at a virology lab at Baylor College of Medicine, one of these summer lab programs. But my major was a sort of interdepartmental program in international development, so some economics, political science, and history. But my science interest gradually morphed into science education. That is, how do you take these really complex subjects, and in particularly, how do you take sort of current research and explain them, either to an educational audience or to a popular audience or something like that. Yeah, so I got interested in science education, okay. And from there I got interested in the history of science. And initially it was sort of a like, how do you explain the scientific process and how science works through sort of the evolution of different scientific fields. But then eventually I sort of got sucked into history of science as its own field. So I got a master's degree at University of Chicago, and then a PhD in history and philosophy of science at the University of London. But then from there, I actually sort of pivoted again and went into modern science policy. So after my PhD, I moved to Washington, D.C., got a fellowship at the National Academy of Sciences, and then a job at the National Academy of Medicine.
Oh, wow.
And there's a little bit of irony there, because one of the early projects I worked on at the National Academy of Medicine, this was the year after the SARS pandemic, if anyone remembers that. And so we had a workshop and a report on sort of learning from SARS, lessons for what the next disease outbreak might look like. And of course, at that time, we were hoping that, coronavirus pandemics would be a very obscure subject, not something we really need to worry about in the future. And then, 16, 17 years later, here we are. But it was interesting to, again, to sort of to move back from science as just sort of, a pure research field to science policy. So, like, how do you take this scientific knowledge and how does it affect different national policies? And then from there, I took a fellowship at the State Department, a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. So they have these that are sponsored by AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, where they take people with science backgrounds and put them in different offices of government. So a lot of people end up in a congressional office, but you can also end up in, the State Department, the Education Department, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Institutes of Health, wherever. And you get a chance to work on, again, scientific issues from a policy perspective. So I did that for a couple of years. And then joined the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is what sent me overseas to Cairo, Egypt, which is where I was until just before the pandemic broke out.
Wow. Oh, wow. So that seems like quite an interesting path you've taken.
I've bounced around a bit, so it's not the sort of typical where, you find one thing and then you sort of focus on it and you get better at that, and then a more advanced position in that, and a more advanced. I've sort of bounced around in a number of different things, and a lot of times it's very interesting. I mean, I've always been a little bit of like, I like to do different things. There is a certain point where you sort of say, okay, to move on, you sort of need a specialty in something, and I've bounced around enough that it's a little bit hard to say I'm a specialist in. For a while I worked in global health policy, but I haven't done that in 15 years. For a while I worked in development policy, but I haven't done that in a number of years now. And then I did some teaching at the American University in Cairo for 4 years there. So a chance to sort of reconnect with the classroom, classroom experience. And that was teaching sort of science literacy and basic philosophy of science. So the American University in Cairo has this requirement that all of the students have to take a course called scientific thinking, which is sort of, again, it's an introduction to philosophy of science, and then also sort of big ideas in science.
Okay.
So,
did you feel that your UIL journey? Did you feel your UIL journey helped you, in college and your career?
Yeah, I think in a couple of ways. So, on the question of UIL and the impact it had. It's a couple of things. Like I say, the combination of the UIL and the summer academic programs that really got me sort of meeting other students and sort of thinking about different things beyond my local environment. Also, from a very practical sense, when I started applying to colleges out of state, for a college someplace in my case, Massachusetts, but I applied to colleges in different places. They're looking at a kid who comes from this little school, graduating class of 49. Most people, a lot of kids did go to college, but mostly not out of state. And so they're in evaluating people. And it's like, okay, how do we know that this kid can fit in with everyone else that we've got coming in? And so if you've done the UIL things and other things like that and said, I've competed against the big schools, I've done these other things, it gives them a level of confidence that they can say, okay, we can give this kid a chance and offer him a scholarship package and all those sorts of things that make it possible. And so again, it's another thing that provides a sort of a way for colleges to evaluate. At the same time, it also provides you a way to develop your skills.
Wow, awesome. So have you ever returned to Liberty Hill High School, or is that just a part of your distant past?
I haven't returned recently. I did return a couple of times during college years. Once just sort of to say hello to a couple of teachers and that sort of thing. Once actually, my junior year, I was doing at Williams we had this winter study term. So there were the 2 long semesters, but then January you could do independent projects. And that was when I was starting to get interested in science education. And so I came back and did some sort of science displays and demonstrations and lectures in different schools in Central Texas, including Liberty Hill. Wow. So I did that, just as sort of like a guest lecture kind of thing. But then the last time I went back was actually when my parents were moving 10 years ago. So they live in Kansas now. And so I went back and helped them move. But by then there weren't a lot of, by then the town was hardly recognizable compared to what it was like when I was there. And not as many people there that I still knew. So, yeah.
I got you. So, retrospective, what do you value the most about that UIL journey?
Again, particularly for a kid from a small school, it really gave you something to work on your own. And again, and that's not to say, we talked about before, there were a few other kids on the team as well, but it was just something to sort of measure yourself against, and develop your skills for in a way. Again, particularly when the school is already having a little bit of difficulty of what do we do with this kid? I'd finished their math classes, most of the regular organized math classes by early in high school. And, later on I would drive to another school down the road to take some foreign language classes to sort of fill up my schedule and that sort of thing. And, the UIL, it gives you something else to work on, to measure your development on, to focus on, to work on your discipline, any sort of thing in terms of, eventually you're going to go off to a college. And, I had a wonderful time at Williams. I absolutely loved it. But that first couple of semesters, I was definitely in the mix with people who'd been to, top prep academies that had a lot more background. I mean, for example, I was always a good test taker, and so I tested into the advanced chemistry, section based on that and on Ms. West's teaching and in high school. But then I got into the actual advanced chemistry section, and they of course assumed that, if you're taking advanced chemistry at Williams, naturally you've had a lot of advanced calculus as well, so you're going to be using that. And I'm like, no. I did some self-study calculus at a sort of really basic level. But again, if you've already done a lot of the UIL practice, it teaches you how to work on your own. And it teaches you how to say, okay, this is a tough problem that I haven't seen before, but I've just got to figure out how to work it.
Wow. So, I consider that next question extremely important. What advice do you have for any young student, perhaps a younger version of yourself, that may come across this interview?
I would say, read widely. This is life advice. I can talk about some of the coaching advice or whatever, but in terms of life advice, read widely, whether that's in the sciences or maths or that sort of thing. Some people do have a very good idea early on of I want to be a physicist, or I want to be a computer programmer or something like that. But it's okay not to be sure. And it's okay to wander around and find your passion. And it's also good because a lot of the really cool science that goes on now is very interdisciplinary. So, we're rediscovering the importance of public health now. Well, that's a combination of some biology, some nutrition, fair amount of mathematics, possibly some pharmaceutical chemistry, depending on what you're doing. And so, you can tailor your interests not just to biology, chemistry, physics, math, but all these other sorts of things. I was in Egypt for 10 years, and there are plant biologists there who work in Egyptology, because you can do really fascinating archaeological work as a botanist. You can do really fascinating medieval art history as a chemist, analyzing pigments and old works of art. And all of the geology and energy science and ocean science and all of these things that are, this really real mix of many different areas of biology, many different areas of earth science and physics and mathematics. And so, I'm not asking high school students to learn all this. I'm just sort of, I'm sort of saying two things. One, read widely so that you get a sense of what turns you on. But it's also, I think it helps in terms of diversifying the community if you're not always thinking, this is what I see of physics, and that doesn't really interest me, so I'm not going to be a physicist. There's so many different pieces that you can do. You can find what it is that turns you on. And what it is that you can explain to your community of, like, yes, this is why I'm doing water science, because we have these tremendous water issues in the southwest of the U.S. right now. And, you can approach that from physics, you can approach that from meteorology, you can approach that from soil science, whatever type of science you like. There's it can be a very sort of twisty and windy road. Or you can go into, like what I did, you can go into science policy, and you can end up traveling to all of these fascinating places and meeting some really interesting scientists from other countries as well. So, keep your mind open, your reading open, as you think about what you do, and also don't get discouraged too early on. If you say, okay, it's very common for you to say, okay, I'm not good at math, because you ran into a calculus course and it didn't agree with you. Well, okay, maybe you could try again, but you can also try probability, statistics, discrete math, logic, number theory, all sorts of other things. I mean, statistics and probability are gateways into so many different areas. And I think there's sometimes we chase kids away because, they didn't understand the point of trig, or they didn't quite make it through calculus. And it's like, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't, if you feel like you do have a talent in this area, but just not this specific type of math, give it another shot someplace else.
Yeah. Awesome. Read widely, broaden your horizons. I love it. Yeah. I love it. So what does the future hold for Dr. Karl Galle?
I should ask you that. What should I be doing? So, right now I'm actually in a little bit of limbo. So my last couple of years in Egypt, I didn't have a work visa there, so we were there with my wife's job. And then she got a job to move back to Washington, D.C. And we moved here just before the pandemic hit. And so, the initial thought was like, okay, well, we'll spend a few months looking for housing and then we'll go back and get our stuff. And that hasn't happened. So right now, my last couple of years in Egypt, I started working on a book project about the astronomer Nicholas Copernicus. Because that was related to something I wrote about for my PhD dissertation a lot of years ago. And there have been a lot of short books about him, but there's never been, in English anyway, sort of a really nice full biography about his life and times. And he's an interesting story, both as, the person who came up with the first modern version of the theory that the Earth is not the center of the universe; it goes around the sun. But there's also so much embedded in how we think about science. How do we think about radical new ideas? How do we think about resistance to new ideas? That I thought this was a really interesting story to try and tell properly. So I've been working on that. It's a little more complicated with libraries and archives closed, and most of my books are still in Cairo. I got a few of them behind me here, but we haven't gotten the rest of them. So still working a little bit on that. Possibly, as things open up, try and get into either some local teaching or see if there's an appropriate policy position. But like I say, on this move, I'm sort of the trailing spouse and working on this book project, which it's fun, but I also rediscover, it's intellectually fun, but I like seeing people. And writing really is this, chain yourself to a computer screen and just, tap out the words. Yeah. And some days it goes okay, and some days you're like, oh my God, can I just go dig in the garden or watch some birds or whatever, because I don't want to stare at this computer.
Wow. So, state champion, 1987, science and calculator, Dr. Karl Galle. Do you have any parting words or final thoughts as we conclude this interview?
Sure. Yeah, apart from the read widely, I guess, the other thing I would say, just to bear in mind, is always think about ethics. And I say that in a sort of general, old geezer advice kind of thing, and this is not something I'm trying to put on high school students. But in some ways I'm passing this on from an honors seminar in college in biology, where they bring in these visiting speakers, and and the guy said, I can talk to you about my latest molecular biology research or whatever, but I want to talk to you about sort of what's happened with scientists who have worked in sort of deliberately misleading health campaigns on behalf of like tobacco companies or things like that, where they know what they're saying is misleading, but it's a good career. And that's kind of an extreme example. But, when you're, like, for example, when you're working on mathematics, you can write the best computer algorithms possible. And if a social media company says, tell us how we make the most profit with this computer algorithms, if you know anything about algorithms, and if you know anything about human psychology, you can say, well, your money is coming from how long people stay engaged. What I need to do is have the algorithms make people as angry as possible. Because when people are angry and upset or reading crazy things, oh my God, can you believe this wild conspiracy or whatever, they stay engaged on the site. And a mathematician or a computer programmer can say, well, I just wrote the program. I didn't force people to stay angry. I didn't force people to hate each other. I didn't force all of these sort of dangerous trends for our democracy. I just wrote the algorithm. And again, this is not geared at high school students, but this is geared to sort of, as you're thinking, you can do great mathematics. You can do great science. But always, have that thing in the back of your mind of like, I can also get by with a decent house. It doesn't have to be a 12-bedroom mansion because some social media company paid me to write the best algorithm to get the country to be ripped apart or something like that. And so, and I think that's also part of, obviously I'm a fan of books, but, it's part of the sort of expand your knowledge. You can be a wonderful mathematician, but understand the impacts of it. You can be a wonderful chemist or physicist, understand the impacts of it, and then go out there and do great chemistry and great physics and great math, because it really is possible, and you can do all of that. And you can start in UIL and you can branch out in all sorts of directions and stay right there in Texas or travel the world or whatever it is that you like to do. Find your own path.
Awesome. Dr. Karl Galle, it's been extremely enjoyable. I want to express my gratitude, my appreciation for you giving up your time and coming and share your story with us.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I really appreciate that you're doing this for the UIL community, for the math and science education community. I think it's a great idea, and I have just the most enormous amount of respect for the people laboring in the trenches of the public school systems like you. So, bravo! And this has been fun.
So, if you ever find yourself in Houston, give me a call. Let's go have a taco and continue the conversation. I really enjoy your perspective. You bring a lot to the table, and I find it very fascinating.
That would be great. That would be great. Yeah. No. The heritage I've kept from Texas is, when we're getting swarmed in tomatoes from just the few little plants in my backyard, and I keep turning them into salsa
Hey, I know some good taquerias around here, man.
Remember my roots. Yeah, no, I would love your input on the best taco places in Houston, because I do miss that from my time in Texas. So I hope this works out. I will let you know if I'm ever in Houston.
Please do. Dr. Karl Galle, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah,
thank you. Farewell.
Thank you. Bye.
Wow, what a fascinating perspective. Dr. Karl Galle, 1987 state champion in science and calculator applications from Liberty Hill High School, a Panther. I really enjoyed that, and if you enjoy this sort of material, please take a moment to hit the subscription button and the notification bell, smash that like button, and leave a comment below. I have many more great things in store for this channel. Your subscription really helps. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. My name is Saul Cantu, and this